Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 29 of A Yank on the Footy. I'm Craig Wessels from Sandusky, Ohio, and I'm glad that you're listening. I hope that you'll consider sharing this podcast with your friends. There are quite a few stories that I want to get to that happened over the weekend. I'm going to dive into those in just a moment. I do hope that you'll consider going to Apple Podcasts after you've listened and giving the podcast a review. I'd love to hear what you think of the show. Don't forget you can also reach me at Yank_on on Twitter and at a Yank on the Footy on Gmail, as well as at a Yank on the Footy on Facebook and on Instagram. Now, I started a couple weeks ago with one of these goals that I'm trying to develop a mailing list with listeners that are listening to the podcast. And so far I've had about a half dozen people sign up. So not quite the number I was hoping for, but I'm hoping that you'll consider signing up. And in the show notes for this week, that if you click the little information button on your podcast hosting site there, it's going to take you to a Google form that's going to allow you to add your email address that is going to let me then send you the new episode directly as soon as it comes out, as soon as it gets released. So in another hour, hour and a half after this episode is done and edited, the episode won't last that long, I'll go ahead and send that out directly to those people who've signed up for the email list to begin with. And one of the other things I did on there is I put on a questionnaire if there are any things that you wanted to address or ask me, or topic ideas or recommendations on people you think I should reach out to and possibly try to bring on board for an interview. I'd love to hear from you. I had a couple of questions. I had one really good one here that I liked, and I wanted to go ahead and share that with you tonight and get into that question. And this is a question from a Tigers fan by the name of Simon Hall, and he's on the email list, and he sent this on to me. So I wanted to go ahead and look at Simon's question before I dove in. I teach school, but not English, and it's summertime, so I believe it's before I dive in, not dived. Yeah. Okay, that's just plain dumb. So Simon asked, what are your thoughts on sportsmanship in the AFL compared to American sports? For example, in the AFL, after games, it's understood that you shake hands with the opposing team. And, well, we're not really doing that right now. A little elbow bumping, that sort of thing. Whereas in the U.S., they will typically leave the field, the ice, the court, etc., without acknowledging their opponents. Simon, I appreciate the question. Hockey, I think, is in many ways a lot like the AFL, because I don't watch a lot of hockey, but every hockey game that I've watched, I seem to recall at the end of the game, the players having the respect for their opponents, even if they got into fisticuffs with them during the course of the game, to shake hands with them afterwards. I seem to remember that happening a lot. And if you're watching hockey and I'm wrong on that, please let me know. But it seems to me like they have pretty decent sportsmanship. I think in the NFL and in the NBA, there tends to be a lot of instances where players are really good friends with one another. Quite often they'll vacation together. They may live near one another in the off season, that type of thing. They might have gone to school with one another. Or in some cases, maybe they share the same agent. So they are friendly that way. So quite often you will see little pockets of players. It won't necessarily be the whole team. Now, at the high school level, I used to coach high school football. I used to help out with that. I've been a public address announcer for football for the last decade, as well as for soccer. Generally, after games, those players will shake hands. At the college level, it happens quite a bit. At the professional level, I know in college basketball, the teams will generally shake hands with one another as they're crossing in front of the benches, and the coaches will shake hands and they'll line up. But like I said, I think in the NFL it happens some because there are a lot of friendships, a lot of camaraderie there. And where I don't think it necessarily happens is in Major League Baseball. And Major League Baseball is unique because they play a significantly longer schedule. For those of you who are listening in Australia, the Major League Baseball season here, when it's a typical season and everything is going on health-wise, that sort of thing, it's a 162-game schedule. They begin playing towards the end of March, beginning of April, and the season usually ends right at the end of September, and then they have the playoffs. So they're playing almost every single day. And during the course of that, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, those 6 months, they might have 10, 11, maybe a dozen off days that are scheduled where they don't have a game on that day. And sometimes what'll end up happening is that if there's a rain out, if the weather doesn't permit them to play, they'll have to make up a game on that day. So they might have gotten a day off at another place in the middle of a series. So a team might go to, the Cleveland Indians might go play 3 games against the Chicago White Sox, and then go play the Detroit Tigers for 3 games, and then go play the Kansas City Royals for 3 games, and then maybe go down to Texas and play the Rangers for 4 games before they would come home and play some games at home. So they'll usually go on road trips or have home stands that'll last anywhere between 6, 9, 12. A long home stand might be 15 games. Or if your team is doing something, for example, if your team is hosting the mid-season All-Star game. This happened in Cleveland just recently. I think 2018, I believe the All-Star game was in Cleveland. So the Indians spent about 2 weeks on the road before the All-Star game, and I think maybe even a couple games afterwards, allowing the people that run the stadium to get it set up for having the festivities of the All-Star game there. So their stadium was not available to them at that time. So, I think that baseball doesn't necessarily have that camaraderie. Now, they might be friends with one another off the field where we just don't see it, but they generally don't shake hands with one another after games, that sort of thing. It just generally doesn't happen. And that's not saying that it doesn't happen outside of the locker rooms or they go out to dinner with one another, that type of thing, but it generally doesn't happen. Because, again, a lot of those baseball players have a similar agent who's representing them, or maybe they played college baseball together, or they played against one another in high school, that type of thing. But for the most part, they're not necessarily. It's not that they're being disrespectful, because if something happens in baseball, if a player breaks some sort of a significant record, gets their 3,000th hit, which is a huge feat. For their playing career, if they get 3,000 hits, that's a significant amount. Generally speaking, when the people in the stands are applauding, cheering on that player, the opposition is standing up on the edge of their dugout or on the field applauding as well, showing respect to that player. So they're not necessarily being disrespectful. It's just something that doesn't generally happen. Now, what's interesting about footy, and I talked about this back in the second episode of my podcast, was that I really think, though, that maybe with the exception of baseball players, because a lot of baseball players have that opportunity to involve themselves with or talk to fans at the games, especially little kids. And it's really about the little kids and getting autographs, that type of thing. You see some of that. I don't think it happens maybe as much in the NBA or hockey or football. Now, sometimes they'll hand them a football or a puck, or their gloves or something like that, or their shoes after a game. I've seen that happen before, but they're not out there signing autographs for, 15 minutes, a half an hour, 45 minutes before a game. That just doesn't happen. I don't see that happening in those other 3 sports. It happens in baseball. But the relationship that I see with, and what I've observed in the 4+ years I've been watching footy, is that and I mentioned this before, I think that the footy players tend to be much more integrated into their communities, into their fandom, if you will, and there's that relationship that's there. Because as I mentioned back in episode 2, in many cases, players that are playing Major League Baseball in the NFL, the NBA, are making exorbitant, huge salaries, and I'm not faulting them for that. If they have the skill set to be able to do that, and the market says, hey, here's what they should be getting paid, then they should make every nickel they can earn. But quite often that is something that will end up pricing them out of their community, if you will. Because after the game, they may go back to their penthouse apartment on the 47th floor of a building in the downtown area, or they'll drive home or be driven home to their house. It's in a gated community where fans can't get in there, that sort of thing. But watching the footy players going around and shaking hands after a game, signing the mini footballs and just interacting with people, taking selfies, and all of the things that I've seen on Facebook and even on Twitter over the years where, hey, guess who I ran into at Bunnings Warehouse? I ran into such and such a player from the Demons and got a selfie with them, or I ran into this person here. I don't see that happening nearly as much with a Major League Baseball player or an NFL player or somebody who's playing in the NFL. Now, it might happen in hockey, and who the heck knows? I wouldn't know anyway because I wouldn't recognize any hockey players. Now, I appreciate Simon asking that question. I hope I answered that to your satisfaction. Again, if you want me to address your question, go ahead and sign up on the email list. There's a spot there for you to ask your question. I'll start going through those as we address each episode, and I'll answer that question at the beginning. I'll plug that in at the start. Even when we're doing interviews, I'll plug that in. I may plug it in at the end of the interview, though. But as some of you may know, there have been a lot of things going on in footy this week, and by far the biggest situation that the AFL is dealing right now is what's going on with Conor McKenna. And if you're not following the news and you're a footy fan, where the heck have you been? But the Irish, the former Gaelic footballer, Conor McKenna, who's a defender with the Bombers, tested positive for COVID-19 before their game with the D's this weekend. And I believe he tested positive on Saturday, if I read it correctly. That he'd been tested every morning. He hadn't tested positive on Friday or something of that nature. But then there was footage or video of him, I believe that was Channel 7 posted, and I put a link to that video. It was a story that Fox Footy did, and then they included the video with it as well, where Conor McKenna is out at practice, and he's doing something that, I think every guy who's ever played baseball or football here in the United States has done before, or maybe if they've run cross country or something like that. You're probably not doing it playing basketball, but you got a stuffy nose and you blow your nose without having any Kleenex or tissues or something of that nature, where they kind of just blow it towards the ground, cover up one nostril and honk, have the stuff come out, do the other nostril, have it come out. There was video of Conor McKenna doing that the day before he tested positive. Now, supposedly he had been working and practicing with the other defenders on the club, so it sounds like they have all gone into quarantine for the next 2 weeks to hopefully ensure that none of them have tested positive, or to nip it in the bud just in case they have, contracted this from him. So, and what it sounds like is that he'd actually gone and visited some friends, the family. It sounds like the family that had hosted him during his first year playing with the Bombers, that there was some sort of a party or something like that happened at their house or somewhere where there were a number of people. So he broke the quarantine rules and visited them, and now is tested positive. So who knows how long he's going to be out? Is there going to be a suspension? Ollie Wines was suspended for having, done an interview. Is he going to be suspended for actually going to this party and testing positive as a result of this? And, so the game with the D's was canceled, and it's going to be interesting to see how do they make this up. When I saw it was canceled, I was sitting there thinking to myself, well, why don't they just give both teams 2 points and move on? And then I thought, well, it was kind of the fault of the Bombers because one of their players had done something. And I said, oh, well, then let's give the Bombers 1 and we'll give the D's 3. So, and I didn't post that anywhere because I didn't want to necessarily catch the ridicule on Twitter about that. And, of course, I might catch it now. But it sounds like they're going to try to make the game up later if at all possible. But there was a story that I saw earlier today, and I posted a link to this as well, where it was being argued that the AFL has basically said that, hey, you know what, Essendon, as long as you've got at least 22 healthy bodies and a couple players as emergencies, you're going to be expected to play. So they're scheduled to play the Blues this week, and if enough of their team tests negative for COVID-19, I think they're fully expecting having the Blues to be playing against the Bombers this week. So, here's hoping that it's only the 7 or 8 players that were at the practice session with him on Friday that are still in quarantine. Hopefully Conor returns to health quickly. But what do you think about that, about the league saying, you know what, hey, if you've got enough bodies healthy, even if you're having to bring up, 4 or 5 or 6 first-year players who've only had a practice match, tough toenails. Your team's going to be playing. I'd love to know what you think about that. Let me know on Twitter. Let me know on Facebook. You can make a comment on the Podbean app as well. You can comment on the Apple comments as well on the Apple podcast section as well. So hopefully Conor McKenna gets healthy soon, but it's a little scary, and it sounds like there's been a bit of a spike in cases in Victoria. And again, I'm not real up on everything that's going on in politics, but it sounds like there's some people that are not real pleased with the leader in Victoria. I saw somebody earlier tonight on Twitter had some choice things to say about him. Moving on to the other big stories of the weekend. Alistair Clarkson went on television during a press conference, and it worked out really well for him. Hawthorn, they had a very impressive showing against the reigning premiers, and I think that maybe his little cryptic press conference worked out to his advantage. And I'm wondering whether or not Richmond is really whether or not Hawthorn is really that good, or is Richmond really that, well, okay, I'm kidding. I don't think Richmond's that bad. They're scuffling right now. I'll talk about that a little bit more when I give you my tips for this week, but I'll tell you, I don't know what's going on with Richmond. I mean, they have been in a bit of a funk. They've looked really average the last 2 weeks, and if I'm not mistaken, they kind of struggled in round one before the shutdown. And is this something that you as a Tiger supporter are worried about? Because I'm thinking that, if they don't improve, this could end up, really catching up with them quickly, because it's a much shorter season, only 17 rounds rather than 22. But they came back with a vengeance. They had a lot of injuries early on. They lost Alex Rance early in the season. They had a lot of people that were hurt. Jack Rewalt was out for a long time. Yeah, I know that Dusty didn't play this past weekend, but it remains to be seen what's going to happen with this club, because I think they're much better than what they've shown on the field the last couple of weeks. Yeah, they played a couple really good teams. They played Collingwood, they played Hawthorn. Both of them are quality clubs. I expect them to be in the final 8. But Richmond is in a position right now that I didn't expect to see them in. I didn't expect to see them in 9th place on the ladder. Of course, I didn't expect to see Geelong in 10th place on the ladder, but there we are. Which leads me to my next thing that I wanted to get into today. And as a Cat supporter, I was thrilled to see them fight back in the fourth quarter. But I'm sure that if you're a Cat supporter as well, you're wondering where the hell were they during the first 3 quarters? Because the Blues just ran roughshod over them. That first quarter, and it was a 5:40 start for me. So I turned on the television, got the game on at like 5:41, and the first goal had already been scored. I mean, it happened that quickly. So I never saw them with a lead. Well, they didn't have a lead, but it was all downhill from there. So I was really down about the first 3 quarters. Got very excited, of course, in the fourth. And I posted online. I said, is this a game that, if they come back and win this as it's going on, is this going to be looked at as one of the greatest comebacks that the Cats have ever had? And somebody posted a link to another game, and I haven't watched the link yet. It was on YouTube, where I think they came back from 35 points down to win. But, as somebody who's only been watching the game for 4.5 years, I don't know every name of every player yet. I'm starting to learn more and more of them. But I'll tell you what, you cannot help but marvel at the way that Eddie Betts plays the game. He just does the right thing at the right time almost every time. He is so much fun to watch. And yeah, it hurt like hell to lose that game on Saturday. But if I'm going to have to lose a game, I just as soon lose a game watching one of the masters of the game doing their job so well. Watching Eddie Betts make that tackle at the end to get the ball back in the hands of the Blues. He's somebody who is a great example and one of the best examples of how to carry yourself and how to play the game on the field. And from everything that I have seen, he's also one of the best examples of how to carry yourself off the field. He just seems like such a nice gentleman. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I really don't think that I am. From everything that I have seen, he is what we think he is. He is a nice guy. Now, something else happened in the game on Saturday morning for me, Saturday night for you, that I had never seen before. And after it happened, I went online and was asking some people because I had no idea what I saw there. It had been something that I'd never encountered before and was wondering, what the heck was that? And during the third quarter, if you've not watched the Cats Blues game, you owe yourself to watch the highlights. If you watched Bounce this evening, Sunday night, you definitely saw this because they talked about it as well, because Sava Radaglia did something that I was stunned by, but then I heard an interesting explanation or possible explanation on this. And I don't know if this was the case. I don't think that Sava Radaglia will ever talk about this, because we're all looking at it as being a brain fade, or what I like to call a brain fart. But, Tom Hawkins took a set shot that was going to go through for a certain goal. And while he got recognition, Radaglia got recognition on Bounce tonight for the Don't Come Monday segment, I think he also should have earned the Golden Fist as well. Because that was a fist that Danny Frawley would have been proud of, until they realized it was the offensive player doing it. But he punched the ball back across, preventing it from crossing the goal line. Okay, and I'm sitting there wondering, what the hell is he doing? And I'm sure every Cats supporter was sitting there doing that as well. And even if you're just watching the game as a casual fan of another team, you're wondering, what the heck is happening? Like I said, I'd never seen it happen before. And I've never seen a game in person before. But I saw somebody online mention something, and I thought this was a really interesting take on it. And those of you who have played the game, those of you who go to the games and watch the games and hear the things happening on the field, maybe you can help me out with this. But a Cats supporter, Peter from Canberra, brought up what I thought was an interesting point. Now, like I said, I've never seen a game before, so I don't know all of the conversation that takes place on the field, where you've got different players who are trying to talk their teammates into different positions, whether they're playing a zone on defense or whether they're switching up which person they're going to be defending or where they need to be on the field to take the handball or the kick or whatever the case may be. So I don't know all of the on-field comments that are going to happen, but he suggested that he wondered actually that maybe somebody had yelled that it was a touched ball, that maybe that the person that was standing at the mark had gotten a hand on the ball and had touched it. And if that was the case, and again, I have no idea if this was happening or not, but if Radaglia had heard, touched ball or whatever comment would have been made to trigger that in his mind, to get him thinking that might have, and they were down by so many points at that point in time, that maybe he's thinking to himself, I need to put this ball back in play to give us a shot at getting 6 points instead of 1. Now, I'm not saying that that's what happened, but Peter from Canberra brought that up, and I thought that was a really interesting idea. So I don't know if any of you who are watching the game heard something, or do you think that's something that he could have possibly been thinking at that point in time? Like I said, I've never seen that happen before, but I thought it was a really interesting take on it. I don't know what happened with this. I really don't. It was just bizarre. And I think that Sava Radaglia is going to be a really good player going forward. He's still extraordinarily young. He's only, 21, 22 years old right now. Big, tall, strong kid. I think he's going to step into that role, hopefully, in the next few years and become a much more forceful player out there. And I'm looking forward to watching him grow as a player. So, yeah, just a couple of interesting things that were going on this weekend that I wanted to touch base with you on. But like I said before, you can't help but marvel at Eddie Betts. He's somebody that I will go out of my way to watch. He, Charlie Cameron, Liam Ryan, Anthony McDonald, Tip and Woody, I love watching them play. I love the excitement that they play with. They seem to do the right thing on the field during the course of the game. Okay? Now, before I wrap up here today, I'm going to get to my tips here in just a moment. I did want to wish all of you dads here in the United States, hope you had a great Father's Day. Hope you had a wonderful and relaxing day. I've been doing a lot of landscaping, and somebody who I interviewed in an episode not that long ago, Gavin Ingham, I put a picture of some landscaping that I was doing. I'm getting rid of a lot of garden space. I'm trying to downsize my gardens and have more grass. I'd rather mow it than have to do the weeding, that type of thing. I'm an old fart now. I really don't want to have to do all the gardening. So I had a small garden bed that had a sandstone wall around it. And then I had a sandstone walkway in the middle of that, and behind it was a second garden up against the house. So I wanted to get rid of that walkway, and then as well as getting rid of that out exterior raised garden bed. So I dug all that stuff out. It took about a week and a half to dig all that out because there were a lot of weeds in there. There's a plant here called snow on the mountain. And if you are somebody who does a lot of gardening here in the United States, I don't know if they grow snow on the mountain in Australia or not, but this is a plant that has these little root system that become runners that run under the ground. So it's not a taproot, it just goes everywhere. And I've lived in this house now for almost 25 years, and I've been trying to get rid of this thing, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. So I was sifting through a lot of the dirt, moving all of the sandstone out of the way, got it all smoothed out. I actually built a smaller garden right up against the house that's raised up, has a little wall around it, looks pretty good. If you look at my video that I post on Instagram for this episode that's coming out, it should have a little picture of that there. But when I posted a picture of it initially, as it was getting dug up, Gavin mentioned that the grass area was looking a little bit like a footy field, because it kind of had that oval shape. And now that the grass is coming back up, I got it on video today for this, and I thought it looked actually a little bit like GMHBA Stadium because it has kind of that little cigar shape to it. So wanted to make sure that if the Cats decide to come play in my front yard, they've still got that home field advantage. So that's what I've been doing with my time. But dads, hope you had a great Father's Day. Before I wrap up, I want to go ahead and go over my tips for this week. Now, this past week, I picked all 9 games, like many people did. I got 3 of them right. I'm not going to count the Essendon and Melbourne game because they didn't play that one. But I got I didn't get very many right. I got both Adelaide's teams right. I got Port Adelaide's game correct, and I got the Gold Coast game. And then I also picked the Collingwood and St Kilda game correct. But every other one I got wrong. So if you're listening to my tipping segment, I hope that you are here for comedic purposes and not because you're going to take my advice and go bet your kids' college fund on this. As they say on the TV channels here in the United States, gamble responsibly. I think they say the same thing in Australia as well with sports bet and that sort of thing. Allen Iverson, I think says to gamble responsibly because he's got the answer. So I'm going to run through the games here. Don't laugh. Western and Sydney. I've got Sydney being defeated by Western by 8 points in this game. And I think that the Bulldogs really got themselves on track this past weekend in Sydney against the Giants. I think it's going to happen again this weekend, perhaps with a little less pushing and shoving. Collingwood and GWS. I've got Collingwood and winning this one by 12 points. And, after the Giants thumped the Cats in round 1, which they did, they've dropped 2 in a row, and they've struggled, okay? And I think that the Magpies are catching GWS at the right time. I still think they're going to right the ship, and they're still going to be a team that gets into the finals. I really think GWS will be there. But they're struggling right now, and I think Collingwood's going to take advantage of that and knock them off by 2 goals. Now, Port Adelaide and West Coast. Now, this one, I'm picking Port Adelaide to win this one by 10. And I think it could be by an even wider margin. Now, hear me out on this. Or I think Gold Coast could, I think West Coast could roar back and reestablish themselves finally as a top 10 club. Because let's be honest, West Coast has not played well up in the hub. But Port Adelaide has played extraordinarily well. And I think that they are riding a lot of confidence. They're playing great footy. Now, again, they're going to be without Xavier Dersma for at least a couple of weeks, I would believe. It looked like he pulled a hamstring pretty severely today. So they're going to be out without his energy. They're going to be without his archery skills. So they're going to need to find somebody to fill that gap in their lineup. But I think this is a very important game for West Coast because, again, this is going to be about a quarter of the season right now, and they're really scuffling. And I think that Port Adelaide's going to win it, but I won't be shocked if West Coast gets themselves back off the schneid and actually wins this one by a few points. But I'm picking Port Adelaide to win this one by 10. Now, Richmond and St Kilda. I've got Richmond winning this one by 11 points, and I'm going to do something as close to singing as you'll ever hear me do on here. To paraphrase a fairly well-known hip-hop artist, will the real Richmond Tigers please stand up? Please stand up. I mean, seriously, what is going on with Richmond? They have struggled since the season began. I mean, they barely, I think it was Carlton in round one, if I'm not mistaken. They barely beat Carlton, which, again, Carlton played really well on Saturday. But I think that they really need to get this win in order to right their ship. This is a club that is way too talented to be mired outside of the top 8. So I think this is a win they're going to get. They've got too many talented players. They've got too many really good players on that team. I think if Dusty Martin's back in the lineup, I think that helps tremendously. Their ruck position's not been great. But I think that, that they need to get themselves going again. And I guess you could, I think you could even say the same thing about the Saints. I mean, they're too talented as well, and they got thumped here recently as well. They got thumped by the Magpies this weekend, and the week before they handled the Bulldogs with relative ease. So I think this is going to be a competitive contest, but I think that Richmond still has too much talent for them, and I think they beat them by 11. Now, this is my toughest call of the week. I think Carlton might beat Essendon by 8 points. If they play. Who the heck knows what's going to happen? But, I think that the Blues are really playing spirited football right now. They're a fun team to watch. They've got a lot of confidence. And I think, quite frankly, the Bombers are going to be distracted because they don't know what's going on. I mean, if they're not playing at full strength, if they're having to plug people in on defense that are normally playing up front, they've not had the reps at practicing playing in some of those positions. So it could be something that allows Carlton to have an easy victory. Now, moving on to our last, I think, we got 4 games left here. Gold Coast and Fremantle. And I've got Gold Coast winning this one by 16 points. Now, everybody, by a show of hands, put your hand up if you thought anybody was going to be picking the Suns to beat an opponent by double digits in round 4. I'm guessing not too many of you put your hands up because I didn't have mine up either. And I have to tell you, isn't it fun? I think it's fun to watch this group of young players, the energy that they have. They're excited to play the game. And that they're playing with the confidence of a team that, really has nothing to lose. Because they've not won anything before, and they're just going out there and they're just laying it all on the line, and they're having some success. And as a Cat supporter, this makes me really, really nervous because they're coming to Geelong in round 5. And here's this really solid young team with some really young talent, and there's my Geelong club that I'm supporting, who looked a little old and out of kilter during the first part of the game with the Blues. So, they're riding a wave of confidence, and I think at this point in time, Fremantle's dropped a couple games out in the hub. I think they might be caught looking at the calendar and counting the days until they can get out of Gold Coast and head back home. So I think the Gold Coast is going to win this one by 16 points. Now, Brisbane and Adelaide. I've got Brisbane winning this one by 18. It might be more. I'm I'm trying to, as I mentioned last week, I'm trying not to alienate people by saying, well, yes, your team's going to be defeated by 47 points. I'm not going to do that. If that happens, it happens. I mean, it can happen to any club. Look what happened to Hawthorn last week. Look what happened to Richmond this week. But the Crows have really been scuffling. They're struggling, and I don't think that the Lions are going to cut them any slack. I think the Lions beat them by 3 goals. I think they're going to handle them really easily. And I don't know about you, but I don't think there would be too many of us that would be completely upset if Chris Fagan was the senior coach on our club or your club. I think we'd be pretty thrilled about that because he really seems to demand a lot of his players, but I think he's also commanding a great deal of respect from his players. And here in the United States, there was a mini-series that was on about a decade ago on HBO called Band of Brothers. And Chris Fagan, in many ways, reminds me of the leader of that group. He started out as a lieutenant, but ended up being a major by the time the war was over. This is all based upon an actual group of people that fought during the Second World War in the Army Airborne. But Major Dick Winters. And Chris Fagan reminds me of him about how much passion he has for his players. It reminds me a lot of what Dick Winters had for his troops as well. So I think they have so much respect for one another. They play really well, and I think this is another week where Adelaide is still looking for their first win. Now Geelong and Melbourne. Melbourne ought to be well rested, but I think Geelong finally gets back off the schneid again and get themselves going in the right direction and win this one by 13 points. Now I hope during the bus ride from Geelong to the MCG that Chris Scott and the coaching staff make it a point of emphasis to remind the Cats that there are actually 4 quarters in a game and not just the fourth quarter in a game. They played lights out in that fourth quarter, but they dug themselves into such a hole. Before that fourth quarter started this weekend, I thought there's no way in heck that they have a chance of winning this game. And then they blew multiple opportunities to win it. So that, there's something to be said for that. But boy, did they look terrible, those first 3 quarters. And maybe it's not so much that they look terrible, but Carlton looked really good. So I think the Cats, if they play to their potential, they ought to be able to, go ahead and carve out their second victory this year against the D's. I worry about their ruck play. Reece Stanley had a great game against Hawthorn, struggled this past weekend against Carlton. He's going to be running up against one of the best in the game this weekend. And the last game this weekend is Hawthorn and Melbourne. And I've got Hawthorn winning this one by against North Melbourne. And I've got Hawthorn winning this one by 8 points. And the Hawks were fantastic against the Tigers. And I think that's going to continue against a very solid Roos team. But I think that the Tigers have too much. North is a good club. They're very much improving. But I think that Clarko has got the Hawks playing well. I think their confidence is high, and I think they're going to go ahead and push through this round, get another victory here. So I've got Hawthorn winning this one by 8 points. So there's my tips. You can tell me where you think I'm right. You can tell me where you think I'm crazy. Round 3, it gave us a little bit of everything. Stuff that we'd never seen before, stuff we hopefully never see again. Guys stopping sure goals for their own team. Teams not being allowed to play because of a pandemic. Hopefully round 4 will bring us back to some normalcy. Hopefully Essendon is able to play. Hopefully they're able to actually get their game in this week, and somewhere down the road they're able to adjust the schedule to allow them to make up that game with Melbourne. Because you don't want to have that one have to be played at the end of the season, 3 or 4 days later just to get the game in. Especially if it has ramifications on the ladder. So, ladies and gents, don't forget that you can find all my episodes of this podcast at ayankonthefooty.podbean.com. You can also find it on your favorite podcast provider. And now that you've listened, I hope you'll consider giving me a review on Apple Podcasts. You could also leave a comment on the Podbean app if you'd like to do that as well. I would love it, as I'd mentioned earlier in the episode. There's a link in the show notes for you to sign up for the mailing list. I would love it if you would sign up for the mailing list. I have that link also posted on Twitter as well. If you go find me on Twitter, you scroll through my tweets there, you can find it there as well. But on at the Apple Podcast, it lets me know what's going well, what I can be doing better, what you think of the podcast, and maybe tells them, hey, this is one that you should consider promoting it a little bit more and bumping it up so people can find it more readily. And don't forget, you can also reach me at ayankonthefooty@gmail.com, and also on Twitter at yank_on, and on Facebook and Instagram at ayankonthefooty. I'd like to thank Mr. Joseph McDade for the use of a couple pieces of his music. I used Backplate and Elevation. He creates some fantastic tunes. You can find his music at josephmcdade.com/music. I want to thank you for your hard work. And, ladies and gents, like I said, I'm hoping you'll sign up in the show notes for the email list. I'm hoping to do a live episode. If I get a number of questions, I'd like to be able to send out to those people that signed up on the email list. Here's an invite. Here's what's going on, and then they can definitely get in there to see it. And then other people, I'll put it on Twitter. Hey, I'm doing a live episode right now. Here's how you get in. But I would love to be able to talk to some of you live rather than simply through correspondence. This is gonna. I'm trying to grow this. And I just went over 5,000 downloads total in the 6 months that I've been doing this. So I'm thrilled that people have been on board. I thank you for listening. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you because, many of us are fans of our teams. Deep down, we love this game, and we love this game called footy. And we've gotten through 3 rounds almost. And here's to hoping that the societal conditions will allow the games to continue. You never know what's going to happen. Hopefully, the little spikes that are happening in COVID-19 will slow down. And ladies and gents, I want to thank you again for listening. I ask that you consider sharing this podcast, sharing a link with your friends, sending it to them in an email, on Twitter, that sort of thing. And may your dribble kick never hit the post. I'll catch you later. This has been episode 29 of A Yank on the Footy. Don't forget that you can reach me at yank_on or at ayankonthefooty@gmail.com. And you can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at A Yank on the Footy. Again, thanks for listening, and please consider sharing the podcast with your friends and family, and I hope you'll consider signing up on the email list. Goodbye until next time.